Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Excuse me. So welcome everybody, and thank you for coming out in the cold and the rain, and welcome to the Zoomers, wherever you might be. The topic for these talks, I'm going to read to you the full topic. So the topic was, we live in a time of great anxiety, fear, and increasing uncertainty. What, if anything, can the Dhamma of the Buddha offer to aid and help us in the here and now? How can the Dhamma help us to engage with the difficulties, suffering, confusion, and sadness we seem to encounter each day in our lives, both individually, within our families, and as a society? How can the Dhamma help and guide us through the ocean of suffering? Buddhism, in inverted commas, is an institution, and all human institutions seem to be failing us at present, or at least seem very fragile, as we discover the deep flaws within them. What happens if we look beyond the institution into the heart of Dhamma to find a way to truly live with ourselves and others fruitfully, excuse me, and to find freedom without fear? This series of talks will try to explore these questions and others in an open and friendly atmosphere, encouraging sharing between friends of the Dhamma. And then I ended the introduction with the words of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. Do not be idolatrous about or bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology, even Buddhist ones. Buddhist systems of thought are guiding means. They are not absolute truth. Do not think the knowledge you presently possess is changeless, absolute truth. Avoid being narrow-minded and bound to present views. Learn and practice non-attachment from views in order to be open to receive others' viewpoints. Truth is found in life and not merely in conceptual knowledge. Be ready to learn throughout your entire life and to observe reality in yourself and in the world at all times. So that's sort of what I'd like to talk to you about. Anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. And at the moment, I think the whole world is experiencing those things. You know, we've just had in Australia, we've had various episodes of COVID, and now we've got the new one in Melbourne. So poor old Victorians are in lockdown, and then we had news that maybe there's some down at Jervis Bay and so on, and that the new variant, they're saying, is far more contagious and much more easily caught. So more fuel for the fear and maybe anxiety and uncertainty. And tonight when KK came in, he was telling me about a schoolmate of his, excuse me, who rang him, or he spoke to not so long ago, and he had a bit of illness and thought it was all sorted out, and then just yesterday, KK, yeah, just yesterday, suddenly passed away, back in KL, back in KL. So we have to deal with these things, and we deal with them every day, or we don't deal with them every day. Yeah. And very often we try to sort of just push them, sort of, so to speak, just out of our line of sight, so that we don't have to spend too much time thinking about them. when it comes to fear, usually, of course, fear is fear of something. Yeah, it's unusual for someone just to say fear. Yeah, it's usually an object of some kind, or a thing of some kind, or can be fear of a person of some kind. You know, in Thailand, there's an expression "grengjai," and it's translated as obligation. Yeah, but it literally translates as fear in the heart. So it's my relationship with someone else where I'm inferior to them, and they can call on me to do something because they've done something for me in the past, and they're an important person. So then now I've got this situation where I need to be fearful of them. So fear, I think in a way, fear is a bit easier to understand because it's usually related to this thing or that thing or this person or that person or this institution or that institution, yeah, such as what's going on in Burma at the moment or Myanmar, where, you know, it's quite clear you need to be fearful, you need to be afraid of what the military are doing. Uncertainty, I think we face all the time because we can't really be certain of what's going to happen from moment to moment to moment. You know, in in the Buddhist tradition, there's endless talk about rebirth. Yeah? Rebirth, and usually people are concerned about, in Thai we say chat na, you know, it's the next life. Yeah? But in fact, rebirth's going on all the time. Now, from moment to moment to moment, you know, now we think this, now we think something else. Yeah. Now we're doing this, now we're doing something else. Yeah. Now we have this relationship, now we don't. We have something else. So we don't really have to hang around waiting for the next life if we really think about uncertainty, excuse me, properly. So, you know, as people who are trying to follow the path of the Buddha or the teaching of the Buddha, we need to think about uncertainty in the here and now, you know, not be worrying about, oh, you know, what's my next birth going to be? You know? Anxiety, though, I think is a very different matter because anxiety, pardon me, anxiety often doesn't really have an object. It's something we experience, yeah? And we can say, oh, yeah, I'm very anxious, and I can be anxious about something, yeah, or something I can't control. But also we can just become a very anxious person, you know, anxious about everything, you know, anxious, oh, does this person like me or not? Yeah. Is this a good thing to do or not? Yeah. I can't decide what I should do. Yeah? So I have anxiety. And of course, anxiety can become such a powerful emotion within people that it can become completely crippling, that they find that they can't do anything. They're just, in a way, captured by this thing, this anxiety. So, excuse me, I wanted to think about these things in terms of the teaching of the Buddha, not in terms of Buddhism. Yeah? Because as I said in that little introduction, Buddhism is an institution, and all institutions are inevitably and invariably flawed. Yeah? People think, oh, you know, the Dalai Lama, oh, it's wonderful. Yeah. Well, he might be wonderful, but the institution has lots of pimples and boils and problems. Yeah? And the same in the Thai tradition. The teaching can be very, very good, but the institution is made up of human beings and they are deeply flawed. Yeah? Some, of course, are very, very, very good. I made the fatal mistake of speaking at my teacher's funeral and saying in Thai that that my teacher was the one monk that I met in the whole province who practiced properly. and my friends Sue and Paul said to me afterwards, Sue said to me, why did you say that? She said, they were all horrified, the rest of them. And I said, well, it was true. That's why I said it. So That's the institution. Yeah. And of course, institutions give rise to fear, to anxiety, to uncertainty, and institutions can crush people. Yeah. They do it all the time, because institutions in the end are about themselves. They're about protecting themselves or enriching themselves. So what I'd like to do then is to think about the life of the Buddha tonight, first of all, and ask you to try and think about it in a slightly different way. Because the reality is that although, in the Buddhist tradition, we say, oh, everyone experiences dukkha, everyone experiences suffering and unsatisfactoriness. The mode of that dukkha, for us, is not going to be the same as it was in the time of the Buddha. It can't be. Of course, certain elements of it, like sickness, yes, ill health and so on. But even the nature of the sickness or the ill health has changed dramatically since the time of the Buddha. In the time of the Buddha, there was, for example, a lot of leprosy. Excuse me. There was a lot of, what do we call it? Malaria, which was called snake wind disease. I don't no idea why, but that's what it was called, snake wind disease. Maybe they thought snakes breathed on you and you got malaria. So the kinds of diseases have changed. The fact of disease, of course, has remained constant. But what people thought about them, what people believed about them, and what people did about them is really quite different. Politically, things have changed enormously since the time of the Buddha. I mean, the Buddha, the traditional teaching or the traditional view is, the Buddha was a Republican and so on. And, well, he was, but his republic was taken over by Kosala, which was a kingdom. Yeah. So the poor old republic of the Sakyans, it really didn't last long because it was swamped by a kingdom. And what's a kingdom? A kingdom is about centralized power. Centralized power in one person or one group of people who control everything and tell you what to do, when to do it, how to do it. The Republic, which is what the Buddha based the construction of the Sangha originally, of course, is about a more democratic approach to things. So I'll read you something a little bit later. So the Buddha says, well, if you hold these meetings and you all meet together and you discuss things, then there's some hope that you might actually continue. But not if you get one person who decides to, direct everybody from their particular point of view, a la Donald Trump or any of the people we've got here at the moment. So the political situation has changed enormously, because with the exception of, well, we have the Kingdom of Bhutan, don't we? The Kingdom of Bhutan. Thailand is still called a kingdom, and with the new king, maybe it's going back in that direction. And excuse me, and we have the Queen of England, but she's a constitutional monarch, isn't she? She's not really, she can't sort of go around giving orders to people apart from the butlers who work for her. So there are very few kingdoms as such, but there is an increasing appearance of despots, who really are like kings in inverted commas. You've got the guy in Belarus, you've got the guy in North Korea, you've got the guy in Brazil, is it? Bolsonaro. We had Donald Trump, who was like an insane king, like Mad King George. We've got these people popping up in France, you've got Marine Le Pen, you've got the new Polish one, the new Czech one, the Hungarian one. They're just everywhere. So although we think that we've got safety in democracy, maybe we should have a little bit of fear that democracy could be swamped by these other things. So politics at the time of the Buddha, there are certain similarities, but they're very, very different. And the Buddha's own involvement with them was very different, because we know that the Buddha had a lot of involvement with various kings, and he tried settling disputes between them. And he was also set up a number of times by different monarchs, you know, who wanted really to sort of, you know, if you like, stop him having the influence that he might have had. Plus his cousin, Devadatta, of course, who I think Devadatta's, now was it a sister, I think, was married to one of the kings. And of course he tried to murder the Buddha eventually because he wanted to take over the whole operation, so to speak. So we've got that. We've got the way that people made a living, which is totally different really to the way that we do now. So you had what was originally an agricultural-based society at the time of the Buddha, but it was undergoing change. And at the time of the Buddha, you had the rising up of the merchant class. Yeah? Remember, of course, you had castes in India, ranging from the Brahmins at the top down to the untouchables at the bottom. The merchant class began to become stronger and stronger during the lifetime of the Buddha. And the monarchs were not at all happy about this because currency changed from being, you know, cattle and chooks, I suppose, and other things like that, a kind of, I don't know whether you'd really call it a barter economy, but it was, in a way, it was much simpler. And with the rising up of the merchant class, they began to use money sort of big time, yeah. Which might also be why the Buddha has a real thing about monks and nuns handling money, except he doesn't describe it as money. He talks about gold, yeah, not dealing in gold. So you had an anxiety arising between the ruling class, the kind of the kingships that existed in India at that time, and the merchants. And the merchants, of course, became more and more and more powerful because they became wealthier and wealthier, and the kings became more and more nervous. And then the kings finally managed to sort of control everybody by sort of, if you like, embracing all of them and calling on the religious teachings of the time, on Brahmanism in particular, so that they could establish themselves at the top, and then everyone else knew where they fitted in. Now, of course, I'm simplifying the thing, you know, in a talk like this. That's not what's going on now, except the merchant class now has really, in a way, gone completely over the top. So we have merchants, in inverted commas, who are billionaires, you know, far wealthier than the Queen of England, I'm sure, and who are sending rockets off to space and all sorts of things. And so they are, in a way, out of control of governments, and well, in particular, I think of the Chinese sending that rocket up and then having it drop back down in an unknown location for the time being. That's the government itself. That's not merchants. But everywhere else, it's largely the merchant group who are controlling things and making more and more and more money, and producing a class of people without money, with very little money. So that's different to the time of the Buddha as well. Now, why am I talking about this? Because, well, I mentioned the religious side of things. Religiously, of course, Brahmanism dominated everything at the time of the Buddha. And this is a, well, we call it now a Hindu belief. It wasn't called Hinduism at the time. And the Brahmins sat at the top. They were the priestly caste. And then you had the warriors and the merchants, and then right down the bottom, the untouchables. Yeah. Or I think now they call them Dalits, don't they, in India? Yeah. This was all held together by this religious structure. Yeah. So, you know, if you wanted to make sure that, you know, you were going to have a good rebirth, then you had to sort of follow the path that was outlined in this early Hindu tradition. You had to do certain things, and you had to, excuse me, you had to stay within your class, within your group. So this was the kind of world that the Buddha was born into. Yeah? And he was born into, the traditional stories talk about, oh, he was a prince and all this sort of stuff. Well, of course, he really wasn't a prince. Yeah? And his father was probably a very senior, maybe like a governor or something like that. Yeah? Because remember, the father came from a republic. It was only later that after the Kosalans took over everything that they reintroduced this idea of kingship and so on. So the Buddha's born into this kind of world, a world that's dominated by power, the struggle for power, a world that's dominated by this particular religious belief and religious structures. There were another group of religious people called the Shravakas, who were like religious wanderers. You remember in the story of the life of the Buddha, he leaves the palace, in inverted commas, and he sees, the last thing he sees is this religious mendicant going past, a Shravaka. These were people who lived outside the realm of Brahmanism. In a way, I suppose you could say they'd kind of abandoned Brahmanism, but that also meant that they'd kind of abandoned, or they were outside social norms anymore. So you had these two sort of opposing, really, religious structures at the time of the Buddha. Now we've got a multitude of religious structures, and most of them are in decline, whether you like it or not. Buddhism included. I think we have to be very realistic about the isms. A few years ago, I had the opportunity, it's actually quite a long time ago now, but I had the opportunity to go to Ireland, and I was absolutely shocked at the condition of the Catholic Church in Ireland. I visited many monasteries. There was one monastery that was huge, really huge monastery, and in that monastery there were 4 monks, 2 of them on walking frames, and the other 2, you could see they weren't far off getting a walking frame themselves. That monastery used to house about 80 or 90 monks. Visiting with some friends and seeing parish churches all over the place that no longer had a priest in them. One priest was responsible for 6, 7, 8 churches and would have to, run from one to the other. So we're seeing that. We're seeing in countries like Thailand, we're seeing more and more and more people disillusioned with Buddhism, and particularly the structures of Buddhism, when they see the corruption that goes on. People with their fingers in the till, that sort of thing, which has nothing to do with the teaching of the Buddha. And that's why I wanted to base these talks on trying to get back to the actual teaching. One way I'd like to do that is to, well, first of all, I'm going to give you all one of these pictures. Thanks, Meredith. If you could give those out, you can take these home with you as a little souvenir. Many of you will be familiar with this kind of image. Okay, has he got one? Yeah, you've all got one? Okay, thank you. So, I printed this little image off because this is Buddhism in inverted commas. This is not the teaching of the Buddha. This is Buddhism as represented or as institutionalized. We've got this figure sitting in the middle. Yes, I won't say any more about that. The figure sitting in the middle there, and then all the little circles around showing different parts of his life, different aspects of his life. And then down the bottom, the parinibbana, where he's passing into nibbana permanently, completely. And for many people, this is Buddhism. And this figure here, the Buddha, that's Buddhism. So people believe that, if they can have something like this and they project all of their anxiety, uncertainty and fear onto something like this, that will solve it all. But of course, we know that that's not the case, that it doesn't happen. Like this statue behind me, which is very beautiful. And I think I've told some of you before, Ajahn Bunyarith, who's passed away now, when I was with him in Adelaide many years ago, and there were a group of schoolgirls with a nun from the local Catholic school. And he said to the girls, would you like to ask any questions? And they were all like this. And the nun said to Ajahn Bunyarith, oh, perhaps you could explain the shrine to the girls. Right? And we were sitting either side of the Buddha image, and he put his hand up and he said, oh, girls, so beautiful and utterly useless. And then the poor nun was horrified because she wanted him to say something really nice about it. And then he went on to explain how it was just an image, and it was there to remind us of the Buddha, not just the historical Buddha, but more importantly, the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha. Yeah. So not to get caught up with the appearance. He was a wonderful teacher. If any of you had a chance to actually meet him or see him at some stage. So at the time of the Buddha, things like social obligation were terribly, terribly important. You had to be connected to know your place in society. You had to know, when you could say something, when you didn't say something. Slavery existed at the time of the Buddha. Yeah. And the Buddha even has a few teachings about slavery, which we'll have a look at shortly. So there were all sorts of things. I suppose one of the things that wasn't as severe as the problem we face now was the environment, because the Buddha didn't face, or his contemporaries didn't face, climate change. I mean, they had a changing climate, of course, yeah, but not the way that we do today. So that's another, if you like, uncertainty, another fearfulness, another cause for anxiety for us. Yeah. And we can ask ourselves, okay, in what way can the Dhamma help us with this? So I'd like you to think for a minute about the story of the Buddha. We're told he's born into a royal household. His birth is foretold. His mother is said to have had this wonderful dream in which she sees a white elephant with many tusks in the dream, and the elephant descends from the mountains, from the Himalayas, comes down and walks around her, and then touches her and enters into her side. In the Buddhist tradition, everything seems to happen in the side. So, and then she knows, I'm going to give birth to someone quite extraordinary. And then she does give birth, and she gives birth to him standing under a tree. And remember, she holds the branch of the tree. She puts her heel up against the base of the tree, and the Buddha emerges from her side, fully formed, and takes 7 steps. Yeah. These are, if you like, the mythological stories around the Buddha. Then the Buddha's mother dies 7 days later, excuse me, and the Buddha is brought up by her sister. So there's a stepmother, and his father is very, very anxious because he wants the Buddha to become the heir to the throne. Yeah. You've got to sort of stay inside the story, even though I've just said to you there was no throne. But this is the story that tries to encapsulate something about the Buddha. And then in one of the pictures in the little circle there, you've got the Buddha with a swan or a goose, and there's an arrow in the body of the goose. And this is an episode in the early life of the Buddha, where his compassion flows out to this suffering animal. There's an archery contest in the early life of the Buddha. And then finally the Buddha marries. Yeah. So he marries, and they have a child, Rahula. Yeah. He marries Yasodhara, has a child, but he's restless. Yeah. He's restless. He can't somehow escape from himself, which is also our experience. Yeah. We can't escape from ourselves. And we know in the story that his charioteer takes him. He wants to go out and look at the city because in the story we're told his father did everything he could to protect him from seeing anything that was bad, or anyone who got old was sacked from the palace, we're told. So the aging were cast aside, a bit like here in Australia now, where they're cast aside into nursing homes, especially by the current government. But anyway, anyway, he goes to the city and he sees a number of different things on different occasions. So he goes out and he sees an old person, and he asks the charioteer, "What's this? Right? What is this?" And the charioteer says, "Well, this is old age." And he says, "Well, am I going to experience?" "Yes, you'll experience that." And he goes back in and he goes out and he sees a sick person, and he says, "What's this?" "This is a sick person. Will I experience this?" "Yes, you too will be subject to illness and sickness." And then he goes out and he sees a dead person being carried on a litter, going to be cremated. And he says, "What's this?" And the charioteer explains it's a dead person, and the Buddha is supposed to have said, or he was at this stage Shakyamuni. He says, "Oh, well, am I going to experience?" "Yes, you'll experience this." Yeah. And each time we're told he rushed back into the palace, fearful, anxious, worried. And then the last time he goes out, and remember all the time the father doesn't want him to leave. Last time he goes out, he sees this religious mendicant walking across the road, and he thinks to himself, "Oh, this person seems very calm, very peaceful, placid," and so on. And he asks the charioteer, "What's this?" And he says, "So this is a shravaka, a religious mendicant." And the Buddha thinks, "Right, okay." So he goes back into the palace, and then he makes the decision after a big party they have in the palace. There's a wonderful description in the life of the Buddha Charita. They have this big party, and the dancing girls are all drunk, and they fall over, and they're dribbling and all sorts of things. And the Buddha finally decides, "Okay, I've got to get out of here." And so he gets up and he leaves, and of course he leaves his wife and child behind as well. And he goes out and he goes off and he joins a number of these Shravaka groups to try to work out the answer, or to overcome the fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty that he's experienced. Very nice story, But as long as we leave it as a story about this particular person, then what about us? I think we need to take that story and we need to put ourselves inside that story and to try to look at the story with imagination and a little bit of creative thinking about it, and think, okay, who is the father who wants to control what I can and can't do? Now, I'm not talking about a literal physical father, because for many of us, our fathers are long dead. But who's the father, so to speak, psychologically and spiritually, who wants to control things and who wants us not to look at these things which we find fearful and uncertain and anxious? Which, so to speak, which part of us is that? When we see those signs that the Buddha saw, sickness, old age, death, in others and in ourselves, what do? Do we really see them, or do we kind of reify them and push them away and do what most people do and think it happens to other people? So-and-so died. It's not me. I'm still here, so to speak. So it's always happening to somebody else. But in that story of the Buddha, the Buddha's realization is it happens to me. And so I really need to do something about this. I can't keep, so to speak, running back to the palace. And the palace, of course, what does it represent? Well, I suppose it represents enjoyment, pleasure, the absence of suffering and so on. But it's all contingent. It's all dependent upon things which in the end are ultimately impermanent, and unreliable. Yeah. So the palace itself will crumble, yeah, to dust. Like that wonderful part of the story, the dancing girls fall over drunk and lie around like this on the floor with their instruments, their musical instruments beside them. And we're told in the story they're all dribbling, you know, because they were so drunk. So the experience of the Buddha, although we're talking about 2,500 years ago, the experience of the Buddha is also our experience. If we want it to be, if we want to actually look, if we want to face it clearly and properly. So we need to, I think, forget about the, if you like, the religious side. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't practice a religion or a religious tradition, but we also shouldn't turn it into an object which it's not. Because in the words of the Buddha himself, there is no refuge in it. Some of you will remember the Buddha's teaching on the simile of the snake. Remember, he says, a man goes into the forest in order to capture a snake, to catch a snake. Now, in the time of the Buddha, you caught a snake because you were going to use it for medicinal purposes. Yeah, I'm not sure what they actually did with it, whether they milked it or whether they, in Thailand, they had this horrible thing of, you know, cutting out the gallbladder of snakes and drinking it and so on. But that was the setting. So he says a man went into the forest in order to capture a snake. He said, but you need to be, if you're that man, you need to be really, really careful. He said, because if you don't hold the snake in the right way, yeah, it will turn around and bite you. Or it will turn around, bite you and kill you. It will lead to your death. And he then explains that this is religion, that this snake represents religion. So it can either heal, it can either bring healing, or it can bring death or sickness. So this is pretty powerful teaching on the part of the Buddha. And I imagine it wouldn't have gone down too well with the Brahmins at the time, because I'm sure they would have seen the little jab that he was having. So in the life of the Buddha, then we should be able to see aspects of ourselves. Yeah? If we really look carefully and see, okay, what is it that I have to leave behind in order to really see old age, sickness, death? Yeah? And in what ways do I stop myself from seeing it? Yeah? See, one of the central reasons we practice meditation, yeah, is not to become enlightened. I mean, that's a reason, yeah, but that's not the central. The central reason is so that we can see clearly what's actually going on within this body, this heart, this mind. So I can finally see, yeah, without spending a lot of time sitting around thinking about things, yeah, because we all know we can delude ourselves with our own thoughts. But when we practice, if we try to practice well, and we practice consistently and so on, we begin to see what's happening inside, so to speak, within the heart and the mind. And then we can see our urge to escape from some of these things. You know, like, get me out of here. I said to some of you before, very often people say, oh, I want to Nibbana. I want to get to Nibbana, yeah? But what they really mean is, I want to go to Nibbana, but I want to stay as I am now, so that I can sort of say that I got Nibbana, yeah, and I'm enjoying Nibbana, without ever actually somehow letting go of the I that wants it all the time. So thinking about the life of the Buddha and thinking about it in personal terms, I think is much more beneficial, much more fruitful than thinking about it as a series of religious images. Yeah? Because the religious images, yes, they're wonderful, but they're only wonderful if they lead us, so to speak, inward, so that we can actually see, okay, this is the Dhamma, this is the teaching. So I suppose that's really the first and fairly simple thing that I wanted to say to you tonight. And I really mean to think about the life of the Buddha and think about yourself and how those two lives, your life and the life of the Buddha, as outlined in those stories, how they actually touch each other, how they might come together, And you can do it imaginatively, Think how would you respond, to some of the things that the Buddha encountered. What what do you do if you see, like the Buddha saw the religious mendicant going past? What's your attitude to that aspect of religiousness? Because remember, the Buddha found that in the end was unsatisfactory. He went and practiced with those people, and in the end, he said, "This is getting me nowhere." Right? So, we think, "Oh, okay, let's get a religion, and that will solve everything." And the Buddha says, "Well, no, it doesn't. What you find is that this is unsatisfactory too." So we've got to go, so to speak, through and beyond the religious element, and go to what I'd call the spiritual element instead. So let me just give you a couple of other things that I think are useful. The Buddha, or the Dhamma of the Buddha, very often people think, I mentioned meditation already, very often people think, oh, it's all about meditation and it's really all about me, my meditation, my spiritual life, and so on. In the teaching of the Buddha, he keeps emphasizing the importance of others. Because we tend to, in a way we can't help it, but we tend to think as though we are the center of everything. I suppose we are the center of our own world, but then we tend to see everyone else as other. Whereas the Buddha's always saying, no, if you look at the other person, what you really see is you, the same as you. So when he was teaching, he placed a lot of emphasis on this. So it's not all about running off to a cave somewhere, and doing meditation, facing a wall for 20 years, or how long did Bodhidharma sit in front of the wall? I forget now, but anyway, a long time. That, of course, is also a mythic presentation of Bodhidharma's experience. I mean, the reality is you can't sit in front of a wall for 20 years and stay alive. At the end of his life, the Buddha goes to a special place. He says farewell to all the places that he knew. He travels back and he lies down or lays down, and he gets ready to enter into Nibbana, into Parinibbana. And the monks, interestingly, one of the monks who's actually related to one of the kings, he ordained very late in life, he comes to the Buddha and says, oh, Lord Buddha, who are you going to appoint as your successor? Like, who's going to be in charge? The ultimate controlling question, who's going to be in charge? And the Buddha says, I've given you the Dhamma, that's it. And then after the Buddha passed away, this monk kept pushing and saying, well, who's going to be in charge? And I think it's Venerable Ananda who says to him, well, no one, because we've got the Dhamma, and the Lord Buddha said that we have to follow the Dhamma and so on. And this monk got into the ear of Mahakasyapa, and they decided then that they would form a council and a committee and all the rest of it. And then so today in various Buddhist countries, we have the head monk, right? Like in Thailand, you've got Prasangkarat, literally means the king of the monks. And in Sri Lanka, you've got, what do they call them? Mahanayakas. Yeah, Sister Sidira? Oh, Mahanayakas. Yeah, and is there one who's in charge of everybody? Yeah. See? Yeah, you human beings, we can't help ourselves. Yeah. So, and there's certainly one in Cambodia. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, I think, some years back. The one in Cambodia, I've forgotten his name now. So this temptation to solidify what should be a living, changing, transforming tradition is very strong among human beings. The Buddha resisted it, and then after he passed away, they brought it back, in order to preserve what they saw as the teaching. But they weren't really preserving the teaching, they were preserving the institution, a big part of which was themselves. So it's very important, I think, that we try to go beyond that, to try to look past the institution, not to abandon it, not to say, oh, it's utterly useless, because it's not. Because without the institution, you wouldn't have things like the preservation of texts and sutras and suttas. Yeah? You wouldn't have a sangha. Now, by that, I don't mean just monks and nuns. I mean monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, because the Buddha talked about the fourfold sangha. Yeah, you wouldn't have a sangha, because without the institution to kind of try to help and assist and aid people and get people together, then what would you have? Just a whole lot of people who were sort of wandering about with different ideas about the Dhamma and so on. But the institution is dangerous. Yeah, the institution tries to, its very nature is to try to control things. And even if we go right back in Buddhist history, we see at the first council there were arguments about what was and what wasn't the Dhamma, and who was reliable and who wasn't. And there's a wonderful incident, I've forgotten the name of the monk now, but there was a wandering monk who came along as they were reciting the suttas, and someone came out and said, oh, quick, come in here, we're reciting the suttas. And he says, I already got them, I heard them before. Yeah, so I don't need to hear you recite them again. So, sorry. When, pardon me, where's the text? I'll just read you the little passage here. Excuse me. So this is from the Majjhima Nikaya. And it says, the Brahmin Vasakara, chief minister of Magadha, asked the Venerable Ananda, is there, Master Ananda, any single monk who was appointed by the Buddha in this way? He will be your refuge when I'm gone, and whom you now have recourse to. And Ananda says, there is no single monk who was appointed by the Blessed One, that he will be your refuge when I'm gone, and whom we now have recourse to. And then he goes on, Vasakara, but is there, Master Ananda, any single monk who's been chosen by the Sangha and appointed by a number of older monks? He will be our refuge after the Blessed One is gone, and whom you now have recourse to. And Ananda says, no, there is no single monk who's been chosen by the Sangha and appointed by a number of elder monks. He will be our refuge after the Blessed One is gone, and whom we now have recourse to. And then he says, but Master Ananda, if you have no refuge, what is the cause for your concord? If you have no refuge, how come you all get along so well together? And remember, the Buddha is very big on the idea of harmony between beings. And he uses a word which actually is a musical term to talk about harmony. And Ananda's reply is lovely. He says, we are not without a refuge. We have the Dhamma as our refuge. And then this man says, you say that you have the Dhamma as your refuge. How should this be understood? And Ananda says, Brahman, the Blessed One, prescribed the course of training that has been laid down. And on Uposatha days, the full moon days, as many of us as live in dependence upon a single village district, meet together in unison. So we go back to this idea of living in harmony and getting together and discussing things and talking about things, not simply giving orders and directions. And when we meet, we ask one who knows the monastic rule to recite it for us. If a monk remembers an offence or a transgression while it's being recited, we deal with him according to Dhamma in the way we've been instructed. It is not the worthy ones who deal with us, it is the Dhamma itself that deals with us. So Ananda's idea, this is very early in the piece, Ananda's idea is it's the Dhamma that we go to, not an institution. Yeah, and we don't have a head monk, yeah, who's going to tell us all what to do. We had the Buddha gave us the Dhamma, the Buddha now has gone, and now we rely on the Dhamma, which is following the Buddha's own instruction. Yeah, I've given you the Dhamma, and that's it. That's all you need. Yeah? However, sadly, as you know as well as I do, that human beings are never satisfied with something like that because we like to be told what to do. We like to have the assurance of being told, do this, is a good thing to do. Do this and you'll have a happy rebirth. Yeah. Do this, as someone told me once, oh, Bhante, if you do this, you'll get a Mercedes. Yeah. And someone else actually said to me, if you chant this, you'll get a BMW. Yeah. And they believed it. Yeah? They really believed it. And here we have the Buddha saying, no, you don't need somebody to tell you. You've got the Dhamma, follow the Dhamma. And of course, where do we find the Dhamma? Here. You know, that I keep saying to people that wonderful chant, the iti piso, yeah? Which is nothing but recollecting the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dhamma, the qualities of Sangha. And when the Buddha gives this teaching, he says, this I call the mirror of the Dhamma. Yeah. And in another teaching, he says to Rahula, what's a mirror for? And Rahula says, for seeing yourself in. Yeah. And the Buddha says, so if you can recite this as a mirror and see yourself in it, you won't have any more questions. Yeah. There'll be no more questions that you need to ask. If you can truly recite these qualities and see yourself in them or see them in yourself. So, the Buddha also has a lot to say about friendship. Yeah. Whereas very often, if you go to Buddhist groups, it's all about learning techniques. It's all about studying doctrines, yeah, and endless arguments about doctrines, yeah, between different Buddhist groups. I said to Sister Sudhira before, one of the big problems with Buddhism here is the way that groups don't talk to each other. They don't get involved with each other because there's so much thinking, oh, we're better than you. Yeah. Or we've got the truth. Yeah. And we know where that leads. If you start saying things like that, it leads to disaster. You know, we've got the truth, you don't. Yeah, we're better than, we know better than you, and so on. And you don't find the Buddha talking in that sort of way. So, just before we stop to do some meditation practice, this is one that you would have heard many times before, but it's worth looking at again. So this comes from the Samyutta Nikaya. Venerable Ananda approached the Buddha, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said, Bhante, this is half the spiritual life. That is good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship. And the Buddha says, don't say that. This is not so, Ananda. This is not so. This is the entire spiritual life. Yeah? Good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship is the entire spiritual life. And then the Buddha goes on and he says, when you have a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, it is to be expected that you will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Noble Eightfold Path is not something that we do in splendid isolation. Yeah? We do it through our interaction with others, through our developing and cultivating these qualities of friendship, companionship, comradeship. how, Ananda, does a person develop, with a good friend, develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path? Here you develop right view, which is based upon seclusion. Now, here he's not talking about seclusion as in running off to the forest, but seclusion within oneself. Yeah? Because you know yourself, you can be in the middle of a forest, and as Megya, one of the Buddha's disciples, discovered, and have a huge whirlpool of things going on within your own heart and mind. Everything else can be really quiet, but there's great turbulence there. Or you can, on the other hand, be in the middle of the city with lots of noise, and you can actually experience great calm, great peacefulness, great centeredness. Yeah? He says, dispassion and cessation. You develop the right intention. Yeah. Now I think that's a really interesting one, the right intention, because what is our intention in practicing? Is it, again, another form of grasping? Yeah. I've said to some of you before, something that happened to me in Thailand, which I've never forgotten, was taking a very, very serious approach to meditation practice, like really, really serious, you know, and developing the idea that, wow, you know, I'm pretty good. I'm actually probably better than a lot of these people here because I'm very serious about this. You know? And then suddenly realizing one day when I was doing walking meditation practice, that this was a complete lie, right? That I was having myself on, that this had nothing to do with the meditative path, if you'll pardon the pun, walking on the path of practice, that this was a fabrication. This was projecting an image of myself that I wanted to have. You know, I wanted to be this holy monk. Yeah? All of it rooted in grasping and the sense of self and so on. Yeah? So here the Buddha says we need to develop right view and right intention, right speech, right action, you know all these, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And he says, by following this method, it may be understood how the entire spiritual life is good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship. So the Buddha is very, very aware of, as human beings, of our interconnectedness with others. And if we're not careful, we can belong to the institution, the religious institution, and lose that connectedness with others. Yeah? We can become very concerned with rules and regulations, and you know, it has to be done this way or that way, and I'll tell you now how to do it. Yeah? And we see this, we see this very often in very, very traditional Buddhist societies, yeah? Particularly among the monks who have been, if you like, inculcated or trained to give everybody else directions. Yeah. I said to Sister Sudhira once, I was visiting a monastery, and I was really, really shocked because there were quite a few Western people there, and the head monk spoke to those people very differently, you know, very, very pleasantly, and then turned to the other people who belonged to his own sort of ethnic group, and began giving them orders, like he was some sort of general in the army. Go over there, do this, do that, do so, and they all did it. So culturally, sometimes that kind of, if you like, the attraction of power and control can take over. So when we meet again next week, I'd like to look at some concrete and practical ways that we might bring the Dhamma into our life and be of benefit to others. So I've printed off for you tonight to take home with you a little sheet. Meredith, if you give them out. Where are they? There's plenty of them, so you give them out. This is a small article that appeared in a magazine that's produced by Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh's group. And you can see there, it's 2008. So it's a long time ago, yeah? And there's plenty of copies, don't worry. You can have one for yourself. And this is about the Dhamma in prison, yeah? The Dhamma in prison. And at the very back, you've got Thich Nhat Hanh's 14 precepts of engaged Buddhism. What does it mean to be a Buddhist who's engaged with the world? Yeah? Not a Buddhist who's running away. Now, I thought if you take this home, you have a read of it, have a think about it, then next week we can start by looking at the question of how can we be engaged as Buddhists or as followers of the Dhamma, practitioners of the Dhamma with the world. And I chose this to start with because I'll tell you a little story. When I was in Thailand, one day when we were having our 11 o'clock meal, my teacher said to me, we were sitting in a little circle, and he said to me, Teacher Dhamma, you should go to jail. And I thought, what have I done? And I said, yes, Tun. Yes, you should go to jail. You should go and talk to the prisoners in the jail. In Thai, the cook, yeah, is the jail. Or Runjam, but cook, they all call it. So I said, okay, Tun. So what should you go? He said, you talk to the prisoners. Yeah. Maybe you can give them a bit of Dhamma. Yeah. And so I began. And the very first day I went, the man on the gate, this was the jail in Phuket, the man on the gate looked at me when I turned up, and I said in Thai, I said, I'm here to talk to the prisoners. He said, you can't come in here. And I said, oh, well, my teacher told me I was to come and talk to the prisoners. You can't just, I said, well, can you ask the governor of the jail, can I come in? Yeah. Oh, wait there then. And off he went, and he came back and he said, the governor says you can talk to the foreign prisoners. Yeah. So I was led into a room that had a long, long bench and wire, very heavy wire, sort of crisscrossed and crinkly. I don't know what you'd call it, but anyway, you certainly couldn't get through it. And then they trotted in 3 foreign prisoners. Yeah. There was a German man, an Australian, and a man from Malaysia, of all places. And they kind of looked at me like, what's this, And so they sat down and we just had a bit of a talk and introduced ourselves and so on. And I just said to them, perhaps I could come each week and we could have a talk. And they said, oh, yeah, that would be good. And they told me a bit about their story. And so I began going to the jail every week. And sometimes I would take food from Arms Round for them because food in jails in Thailand is really terrible. And sometimes take something like if they needed a pair of thongs or something, I'd try and get them a pair of thongs and take those up. And so after quite some time of doing this, after some months of doing this, I went to a ceremony. We were actually blessing a shop in town. And we got there and there were monks from another monastery in the province. And one of them said to me, oh, you're that monk that goes to the jail, And I said, yeah. He said, what are you wasting your time doing that for? And I said, what do you mean? He said, Bengam. It's their karma. Let them get on with it. Yeah? That was the attitude. Yeah? It's their karma. Let them get on with it. You're wasting your time. Yeah? Well, that jail finished up with a little library of Dhamma books, with a doctor who went to the jail regularly to treat the prisoners. My sister went to the jail. She was a nurse at the time. She went to the jail to treat Helmut, one of the German, no, not Helmut, Wolfgang, to treat him for leg ulcers at one stage. Because I went to talk to the governor and ask if she could come in, and he said, no, absolutely not, And then I was a bit naughty because I said to him, oh, well, I'll just have to ring the German embassy and see if they'll send the doctor down, And he said, well, all right, she can come in and, so she did. She bought things from the pharmacy and took them in. So that jail finished up with a little Dhamma program, yeah. So it wasn't Bengam, yeah. It was their karma, if you like, to also receive the Dhamma and help each other. With that. Now, I've no idea whatever happened to that after I left, but certainly for a while it was going well. But none of the local monks wanted a thing to do with it, because monks don't do that, they told me. Yeah? And yet we find the Buddha talking about doing it. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, but you see, things change, don't they? And people lose sight of what's at the heart of the teaching. Yeah, and they're just about protecting the institution and protecting themselves. You know, human being, we in a way we can't help it. We do it again. We do it without thinking, really. Yeah, I remember another. I'll tell you another lovely story. We were going out to do yet another blessing, and a pickup truck came to get us, and there were, I forget now, maybe 6 or 7 of us, and the head monk, not my teacher but another monk, was sitting in the front with the driver, and we all piled into the back and sat on the edge of the pickup, you know? And I pulled a book out of my bag and started reading as we bounced along the road, and 3 or 4 of the other monks were sitting there smoking as we went along, and one of the ones who was smoking said, "Oh, what are you doing?" You know, I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" "I'm reading." "Oh, put that book away." He said, "It doesn't look good to read a book while you're bouncing along in the back of a truck," but it was okay to be smoking. So maybe we do a little bit of practice, and or maybe you might like to ask some questions now before we do, and then we can end with the practice. If there's anything. In Thailand, it's very common, or it used to be. I don't know now, but it used to be very common. And if you went to a dana or something, people would present you with cigarettes and a handkerchief. The cigarettes wrapped in a hanky. No. But you've got to remember, I mean, a lot of people there smoke. It's not uncommon at all. So yeah. And in Burma, the monks smoke those big, like a cheroot. Yeah, that sort of thing. Anyway, let's not get worried about what they smoke or how much they smoke. Okay.
Are you saying next week you're teaching, or the week?
No, the week after. Yeah. Next week. Who's next week? Yeah, Bhante Akaliko. Yeah, that's good.
One question is at the point when Buddha passed away, he was still the central of teaching follower. Was he like a bit over optimistic to think that, you know, without a successor, people can just.
That's a very good. Yeah, that's a very good question, Meredith. Was he?
Okay, there's a law, there's a constitution. Okay, everyone.
Get on with it. Yeah, I know. Well, maybe he was a bit too trusting, but maybe also he realised that part of sustaining the Dhamma was the struggle. You know, being human and having to come to terms with, okay, I've got the teaching here. How am I going to live it? How am I going to embody it? Yeah, and not just for myself, but for others too. Yeah. Whereas if you, I think if he'd appointed somebody, we would have been in trouble from day one. Yeah. Well, of course, they didn't give him too much time because they then appointed someone. They had a council and so on, and then historically it developed into appointing a head monk. Yeah. Who, interestingly though, in the Thai tradition, although there's the Prasangkarat, he doesn't have any immediate authority if he goes to visit another monastery. I mean, he'd have a lot of pressure he could bring to bear, but he couldn't really go in and give orders to people, in theory.
I think Bhante, the Buddha didn't want to be put on a pedestal.
No.
And he just said, look, just follow my teaching, but don't worship me.
Yeah.
So that's why I encourage the practice of you learning by yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I tell the kalamas in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, initially too, Buddhists recognized that drive in the Buddha when they made artistic representations, because for the first few centuries, he was not represented in a figurative form. He was represented by an absence.
Yeah.
So you had the Bodhi tree with a cushion under it, or you had a Bodhi tree with footprints underneath it, or you had just a bowl, you know, representing the Buddha. So it's kind of a negative presence, yeah, but not the form of the Buddha.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The earliest, you see, like the earliest structure, like in Sanchi, you don't have the image of the Buddha at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Interesting though, you do have the young maidens hanging off the side. Remember? Yeah, and they're that's relates partly to the Buddha's birth story. Yeah, because Yasadara had to. That was an old Hindu belief. You know that you took a young girl, preferably a virgin, in order to restore fertility to the land. So she would go out and she would pull the branch of a tree down and she would kick the base of the tree with the back of her heel in order to encourage the rising of sap and so on. Yeah. So you've got those wonderful figures hanging off the. Yeah, they're quite marvelous, aren't they? Yeah. So should we do a few minutes of practice and then finish and hope that the rain has stopped for the time being? Sound like you've got a cold, Ming. No, you don't? Oh, okay. So after all that talk and all those words, just try now for a few minutes to let go of it. Try to let yourself settle. Try to let your body settle and relax. Excuse me. Let yourself just be very gently aware of the body. Aware of the air in the room touching the body. Gently aware of the air in the room flowing into the body, becoming breath. And then flowing out again. And just within your own heart and mind, dedicating these few minutes for your practice so that you might actually experience the Dhamma in your own body, heart and mind in these few minutes. Just the air in the room flowing into the body, becoming breath, and flowing out again. And here in this most simple of experiences is impermanence. Right here, right now. So just resting into the body and resting into the breath. Now this breath this breath. This breath will never come again. So just being at ease with this present experience of impermanence. Now this breath. Now this breath. And this breath will never come again. And recognizing that this breathing is happening by itself. You're not controlling it, you're not stopping it, you're not trying to change it. So there's no I conducting the breathing. Just this breath. Just this breath. This breath will never come again. Resting into the body, resting into the breath. And as you end your practice this evening, just make that little dedication within your own heart and mind. May this effort that I've made with my practice be of great benefit and blessing to myself, to all other suffering sentient beings. May I and all beings be well and be happy. Might just end with a little blessing. Yatha varimaha pura pariparenti sagarang evang mevang itodinang petanang upakapati chitang paritang tunghang kipameva samidatu. Sabe parentu sankapa chantopanara soyata mani jatira soyata. Sapitio vivachan tosaparo kavina satama deva vavantarayo sikudikayo ko bhava abhivadana sili sanichang. Udang pachayino jataro tamma vatantiya yuvano sukhang palang. Bhavatu sapa mangalang rakantu sabadevata sava buddha nubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sapa mangalang rakantu sabadevata sava dhamma nubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sapa mangalang rakantu sabadevata sava sankanu bhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Have we zoomed out? Anyway, thank you to everyone for coming, and drive home safely and carefully in the wet weather. And then have a read of that little article. It's quite a nice little article. And then have a look at Thich Nhat Hanh's Engaged Buddhist Pointers or Precepts.